Hi everybody, Rob Burnholz here again, this time for AE Toots. In today's tutorial/demo, I'll show how for a recent project I created a newspaper page flying in, then it crumbled up, and I used this as a transition. The heart of this animation is the DigiEffects Freeform AE plugin. It's kind of like Mesh Warp, only it works in full 3D. You can take a layer, it becomes a 3D mesh that can be distorted, pulled, displaced, and animated in true 3D space. There's nothing else like it. So let's get started. We'll begin not in After Effects, but in Photoshop. Let's run over here to Photoshop, and we'll quickly mock up this newspaper. I've already started here building a masthead. We need to give our newspaper a name. So here I have a text layer, and we'll call this the Anytown Demo Times. Okay, because we're going to give this demo today in any town, wherever. But the big story, and I've already kind of mocked this up for you, the big story of the day is that this just in, junk food makes you fat. I put this story together because it's based on my personal experience. Here's the rest of the story, written by my good friend Joe Bag of Donuts, and his research shows junk food makes you fat. We have one more layer underneath that. I have this paper texture layer. Let's go ahead and just show you this. This is just a texture that I worked on a little bit. It's really plaster on a wall, but I found that with a little tweaking it made some great newspaper texture. So let's just turn on everything else. Let's save this as the newspaper page. Newspaper page. And we'll save this in my freeform tutorial folder. And now let's move on to After Effects. Let's go ahead and make a new composition here in After Effects. Let's go ahead and bring in our newspaper here. I see it as the I saved it as the newspaper page. Don't know what I was thinking there. Newspaper. I'm also bringing in the newspaper texture. That was that background layer saved out separately. Let's drag them both right into the comp. And that's our newspaper texture. We're going to turn off its visibility. In fact, I'll put it down on the bottom, kind of out of the way. Even better. Let's make it a shy layer, because we don't even need to see that. Just kind of have it there in the comp. And here is our newspaper. It's a 2D layer. We're going to keep it 2D, even though Freeform is a 3D effect. Thing about After Effects is these 3D plugins, if you apply them to a 3D layer, things get really weird. It's kind of like crossing the streams, you know, in Ghostbusters. That would be a bad thing. So we'll just keep this 2D. And just to show you the layer, there it is. The Anytown Demo Times. Let's bring it back up full. And let's apply the DigiEffects Freeform filter. You notice that as I zoom back here, that is our whole layer. A grid appears divided into quadrants. That is the default. And these are control points on every one of these corners of a grid, anywhere it intersects. This is like Mesh Warp. You could take this, see, and you can pull it. You could take this and you can pull it. You could take this point and you can pull it. And just like Mesh Warp, they move around. And you do your distortions. But you notice some things right off the bat. As I pull this, it overlaps. It doesn't just squeeze. It's really moving things, and it's moving them in 3D. We can see that if we go to our custom view here. Excuse me, I have to have a camera first. Let's have a new camera. Let's add just a 3D camera. There we go. And go to a custom view. And now when we see our newspaper page with our grid on it, you'll see that by pulling these control points, we really are moving them in 3D. Look at that. This to me is just so cool. They bend, they warp, they twist. It's really awesome. It is really true 3D inside of After Effects. Now for the effect that we're doing now, let's reset this. I'm going to need more than just those 4 quadrants to have a few more control points. So in the Freeform plugin, on the grid here, we're going to go ahead and make this, say, 5 rows and 5 columns. Now you see I have more control points to pull around. It'll be a little more work, but in order to crumple this piece of paper up, I need lots of control points because we don't want it to crumple up only from 4 corners and a center. Because this is not really a 3D layer, all of your transform controls that you would normally use in 3D to move a layer in or out, they show up right inside of the freeform plugin instead. Let's see where they are. Here we are, 3D mesh controls. So now if I want to push this back some, I use my position Z over here. Bring that forward and bring that in view that way. So now we have this right here. Another thing I'm going to change up for this is because the default color for the grid is yellow, let's go ahead and change the grid color to red. It's just much easier to see when we start pulling these points around. Now there is another tutorial around that Lloyd Alvarez did using freeform that showed how he could turn a layer into kind of fabric or paper and fly it in and just sort of roll it over on its edges and compress it some. That's essentially what we're going to do here for part 1. Let's go ahead and skip ahead a few seconds into this, say about the 3-second mark, and on my mesh distortion under grid, I'm going to click that stopwatch and make these keyframes. All of these control points now, as you see, if you click on it, they become control points. Those are all going to be keyframed. And at this point, we're also going to want to keyframe all of our positions and rotations. And let's rotate this a little bit on the Z around here and maybe even tilt it back just a little bit. Okay, and that's where we're going to end up position-wise. So that's why I have all these keyframed at this point. Before I go ahead and start moving these keyframes, let me show you another important feature of freeform. And that is, besides moving these control points around in 3D, it has awesome displacement controls that will displace a layer in 3D. So you can use text, you can use any luminance map, any layer can drive the displacement of this in 3D. In this case, we're using our texture map. So our newspaper texture, use the layer's luminance, and I'm going to crank it up to about 60. And what that has done for us, if I move in, let's zoom in here using my position Z. And what you'll see is these wrinkles really are displacing. I mean, look at the text here as it rolls across the wrinkles. In fact, if we crank it up, you'll really start seeing it to like some bizarre extreme. These wrinkles are really insanely wrinkled now, and they are in 3D. Another thing to notice is our edges. Our edges here you see are all very jaggy. The anti-aliasing is actually by default turned off. Having a mesh the size that freeform generates is very render intensive. So by default, you have 3D mesh quality here. The anti-aliasing is turned off, but we can turn it to low, and that smooths things right out. Let's move back in time about a second or so, maybe 2 seconds, and let's just start folding up our paper. You can do this with a displacement map. It's a big time saver, but we have some grid points here, control points. So let's start squeezing some of these together. And we're just going to vertically kind of compress this newspaper page like an accordion almost. Since we're looking at this straight on, we can really only move these on X and Y and see that they're moving well in X and Y. But if we go back to our custom view, and now if we start pulling these points from an angle, we can see that we really are moving them more in 3D. Let's just sort of crunch things together here. So I'll just keep pulling these and pulling these down and pulling a few in. And pull. Alright, let's also rotate this around a little bit here. Rotate on X, rotate on Y, and spin it. You can see it's 3D there. And move its position. Well, let's just move it over here this way. Maybe out a little bit more. Position. Okay, and if I were to step through these frames, see the paper comes in, Straightens itself out. And there's our page. Let's look at our keyframes. There they are. Let's ease into all of them. Just a little keyframe assistant. Easy ease in. So it looks okay. It's still really flat, but it's a true 3D layer, even though we have not enabled 3D. That means if we were to add a light, it will use lighting. Let's just see whoever my last light was. Oh, well, pretty handy there. Oh, it moves into the light. We don't have a lot of shadows there. It's become flat, but there you see it reacts totally to the light. All of that is a short version of what Lloyd did in his really great tutorial. The effect I wanted was to do something different. It actually first came up on the After Effects list. Somebody wanted to crunch up a piece of paper. This is the way to do it. It's the only way I know it can be done in After Effects to truly take a layer, to form it, and we're going to crumple this up into a ball. Let's just move ahead about 1, 2, 3, 4 frames. Not very far. 5 frames. I'll be generous. We'll move ahead a few frames here. We're going to highlight our newspaper page, go to freeform, and now we're going to start animating these points and really crunch this thing up. It's a little tedious, but it looks really cool. We just start by taking these points and we're going to crunch them up, drag them to the center. I start sort of in the center and I just keep working my way around and I keep dragging these points in. Now, one thing that will help make this more realistic is actually if I stop dragging right now, let's go ahead and go back to that custom view. I'm going to take these same points and I'm going to pull them in and out randomly. All of my points. Just crunch some forward, take some, push them back. We're just moving them around. In, out, up, down. And you can see I couldn't really crunch anything up if I only had the default grid on of 2 by 2. I found 5 by 5 gives me just the right amount of control layers. In, out. Okay, let's go back to our active view and keep on crunching these things around. Just start pulling them all the way into the center. You can overlap these a little bit too, because a real piece of paper would indeed overlap. And you can twist them. Take some of these control points and these handles and move this around. Give it a much more organic feel. Okay, we've crumpled this up quite a bit here. Let me click off of the layer, see what it looks like. And let's look at these keyframes here. Oh, that crumpled up pretty good. So I'd like to throw in another little detail about freeform here that makes this look better. If we look at this crunched up, you can see the remains of the grid and where I pushed and pulled. Well, one of the controls in freeform here, we talk about the mesh subdivision. How many polygons this mesh is going to be divided up to. The default is 30, and that's usually good for almost everything. But in a weird non-intuitive moment here, as we begin this crumbling effect, I'm going to turn the mesh subdivision down by half to 15. So there's less definition between all those control points now. It'll just actually smooth it out as it tries to stretch the deformation over less polygons. So now, when it crumples down, there is something about it that looks a little more organic and less defined. And if we turn our anti-aliasing on, at least even to low, it looks a little bit better. Everything else from here out is just tweaking. Let's take this comp and reverse it. The way I'm going to time reverse it is just drop it into a new comp and go minus 100%. There's a lot of other ways to do it, but that's fast. And now what you see is a crumpled up piece of paper that I've picked up out of the trash. And what does it say? It says, "This just in, junk food makes you fat." What? Get rid of that. I like junk food, and we throw that off the page. Skipping ahead just a little bit here to wrap this up, I pulled the newspaper forward as a tweak with freeform, moved it forward in Z space to get a little closer so we could read that headline, just rotated it a little bit, otherwise I kept it the same. And we added a white solid here, to which I'll turn that on as a background. Added a ramp, just black on the top, little deep red on the bottom, just so I could get a background to, again, render this demo. This wouldn't be a finished deliverable. And maybe last but not least, we add a little motion blur. And to cheat a little bit, there are lots of ways to add motion blur. My favorite actually is to add a new adjustment layer to the top, and let's just go ahead and use Real Smart Motion Blur from Revision plugins. And that's quite a bit of motion blur. Let's bring that down, maybe cut it in half, and that looks pretty good, kind of natural, nice motion blur. Let's render it. And oh my god, junk food makes you fat? I didn't know that. How am I going to live without my candy corn? Well, anyway, we've seen today how Freeform can do some amazing things, unlike any other plugin or filter on the market that I know of for After Effects. I'm Rob Bernholz. Thanks for spending 15 minutes with me, and see you next time.